Welcome to episode 149 of the Various and Sundry podcast. I am your host, Matt Harmon, joined live from the Vault Studio on the beautiful campus of Grace College and Theological Seminary by my good friend, my colleague, my co-host, and the man who is driving 3 hours this week to another city just to hear me speak, John Scott Sloat.
Let's be quite frank. Hearing you speak is definitely a positive of the trip. Don't get me wrong, but it is not. I am going to connect with other individuals.
Oh,
some time to chat.
yeah.
Now, I won't be on my phone doing email as some presidents were at our inauguration, but I will be paying attention. But I'm going to connect with other people.
Okay.
Yeah, I threw you a curveball, didn't I?
You did. I'm dying to follow up on that, but I'm not sure we should on air.
There were some other presidents who came to our school.
Oh, you mean from other institutions?
For Drew's inauguration.
Yes.
And were on their phones doing email.
I'm not surprised by that.
And I will not out them here. But after the pod,
Okay.
we can have
All
a
right.
conversation about who paid attention and who did not.
Yes. Yeah. So, well, when you think about it then, in one sense, we're actually taking the pod on the road then to Columbus this week
I suppose.
in an extended sense.
Yeah, I suppose. What are you teaching on, by the way? You got a preview for us?
Yeah, I'm doing something I've done somewhere else, a modified version. I always like to freshen it up. But it's basically on the modern understanding of identity and the image of God. Like basically
Okay.
helping us see how we as contemporary people think about who we are and how the Bible speaks into that in terms of how we construct our identity and how we understand our identity.
Danny in Ohio going to be there?
I don't know. I don't know.
Interesting.
He could be.
I'd like to see Danny.
Yeah, I think that's probably about an hour-ish drive for him.
That sounds
up
easy.
to C-Bus.
That sounds easy.
Yeah. Yes, indeed.
So we'll be in Columbus, Thursday?
Yeah, and we're actually recording on the day this episode drops, which is unusual. on
Yeah,
a
that
Tuesday.
is weird.
Yeah, because of your highly packed schedule as a
Yeah.
very important person in advancement, we were unable to record yesterday.
I'm just always on the move.
Always.
Just headed
A
to
mover, a shaker.
high-profile meetings, jet setting, all the things. I'm just going to.
All the things. Yes, indeed. All right. If you'd like to contact the show, you can reach us on Twitter at VNSPod. You can email the show, variousandsundrypodcast@gmail.com. You can find us on Facebook and YouTube. And as always, we would love for you to leave a 5-star rating and a review. That helps whatever algorithm
It's been a while since we've had a 5-star rating and review.
it has.
We'll probably talk about it if it were to happen. If you left a good review, we'll talk about it on the pod.
Yeah.
So if you've yet to leave a 5-star rating and review, go ahead and do so now.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we'll talk about it on air.
For real. Yeah, that's
Most likely. I want to leave myself a little wiggle room in case somebody just writes something ridiculous.
yeah,
But
that's fair. All right. You ready to talk some sports?
sure.
Let's do it. So,
You want to start with college football and the wild, crazy world that was college football this weekend?
it's part of what makes college football great is the measure of unpredictability. So, let's start with the Buckeyes.
I watched the second half of this game.
Did you see the wind conditions they were playing in?
Yes.
Now,
I turned it on because it was a close game at halftime.
yeah, let me just say up front, Ohio State played terribly. They still should have won the game by much more than they did, even with constant wind of 30-plus miles an hour and gusts over 50. They still should have won by more than that. But, it can be a little misleading, I think, to look at that score and go, oh, they only beat Northwestern by 2 touchdowns. Okay, well, yes, they should have played better. But you go out there and try to throw a football in 30-plus mile-an-hour swirling winds, and we'll see how that works out for you. Anyway, big game of the weekend was Georgia against Tennessee. Mm-hmm. Georgia dominated that game, controlled it from
I watched the first half of that
beginning to end. And that's no knock on Tennessee. Georgia's just really good.
Georgia's a good football team, yeah.
And it was at Georgia.
Which brings me to a point I wanted to talk about. You had what did you call the scenario where 2 or 3
playoff Armageddon.
Playoff Armageddon could take place. And this was one of the games you predicted would happen, that Georgia would beat Tennessee and would start the ball rolling.
Yeah, but it got derailed.
It got derailed later in the day. So, yes, let's transition to that game.
Yes. So LSU beat Alabama. Did you see any of that game?
No.
I know it's a night game. Come on.
Yeah. Anything after dark, I'm useless.
So now that we've had the time change, does that mean you're going to bed at like 6 o'clock?
I wanted to fall asleep at 8:30 last night. It was bad.
So LSU beat Alabama. That game was at LSU, tough place to play, and it's
knocked Alabama out of the college football playoff, right?
Yes. And striking – so the game went to overtime. And LSU – so Alabama got the ball first, scored. LSU, on their very first play of overtime, scores. And they decide, we're going for 2 to win the game. Old riverboat Brian Kelly there. Mm-hmm. And they got it. And LSU knocks off Alabama. So that takes out one piece of that sort of
terribleness,
Armageddon scenario. It might create some other ones, but and shout out to the Notre Dame Fighting Irish.
Yeah, what a world!
They exposed Clemson for the fraud that they were, and they dominated Clemson. I expected Notre Dame to win that game. I had such little confidence in Clemson that they were such a fraud, even though they were unbeaten. The ACC is terrible this year.
Well, I was about to say that's probably showing up that the ACC is a fraud. That it's just a bad conference.
It's a very bad conference in football this year. That mixed things up. The college football playoff rankings will release later today, and
any predictions?
I would expect Georgia at 1. I still think Ohio State will hang on to 2, even though they played poorly. I think Michigan will be 3, and I think TCU will move to 4th.
Okay.
So where you really get into some interesting scenarios with the playoff possibilities down the road is if TCU loses. If they run the table, they're in because they're in the Big 12. It's a Power 5 conference. I think it's a pretty weak conference this year.
Not as bad as the ACC, though.
Not as bad as the ACC. So theoretically, then you'd have assuming Georgia wins the SEC championship, which it looks like they will play LSU now, unless LSU falls apart.
Yeah.
So here again, this is part of the reason why I love college football and why I hate being a college football fan. Every week absolutely matters. If you're an NFL fan, a great year, if your Jets go 12-5, you're going to be through the roof excited.
Absolutely.
But that's 5 losses.
Yeah.
Yeah. I kind of envy being an NFL fan sometimes where it's like if your team loses, that's not the end of the world.
Try baseball.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Let's talk about it, John. I mean,
oh my goodness,
they shocked the world.
They indeed shocked the world. So I think it was like Wednesday or Thursday last week. They announced what uniforms the Jets were wearing, and the game was like a 10.5 or 11-point spread in favor of the Bills. Mm-hmm. It went to 12 because the uniforms they were wearing, the Jets don't win in those uniforms. So Vegas looked at the laundry that the Jets were wearing and said, "This is going to be another point to Buffalo." It was a very weird week for that stuff.
That is a very strange conclusion, yeah.
But I think the Jets set themselves apart as one of the NFL's best defenses.
I
Sunday.
think that's fair.
We have two cornerbacks. One is 25, one is 22, and they locked down the wide receivers for Buffalo.
Yeah.
Stephon Diggs did not have a catch in the second half. We sacked Josh Allen. I almost said Wilson. He's a pastor. My goodness, we are not attacking any Ashland pastors today.
No, I should hope not.
We sacked Josh Allen 5 times. He's been sacked 10 times all season.
Okay.
So, and it looks like we may have knocked Allen out.
Yeah,
he's got an elbow
some
issue.
sort of elbow issue. I think there's supposed to be more information released later today after he gets examined.
Zach Wilson played good enough. I think he's now realized, at least I'm hoping he's realized, he doesn't need to play hero ball out there on the field. That defense is good enough that if he can put up 12 to 24 points in a game, they're going to win most of those games because the defense is just that good. And he's got a good connection with Garrett Wilson.
Yeah, he needs to throw the ball to him more. He's still not getting enough targets in my estimation. Garrett Wilson's not getting enough targets.
He caught 8 of 9 targets this last week for 92 yards, I believe. So we were well pleased. And then I think we came into that final drive where we went down and kicked the game-winning field goal. I think it was 6 minutes on the clock or something like that. We were expecting, or me, the fan, was expecting, okay, we're going to throw the ball a lot because we've got to get down the field in a hurry. They couldn't stop the run.
Yeah.
So it was 12 yards, 15 yards, 7 yards. I mean, just huge chunks on runs that the Bills' defense just could not stop. And I think they were worn out.
Yeah.
So, I think the Jets showed that, they're a real football team and that they're a real playoff contender this year.
So their record now is what?
6-3.
Okay. And are they still in second place, or are they tied now for first with Buffalo?
I believe they are still in second place. Buffalo has already had their bye, and so they're only 6-2.
Okay.
So they have a slightly better winning percentage.
Gotcha. Now, of course, the Jets will still have to go to Buffalo.
Yes.
Later in the season.
Yep.
And
so we have a bye this week, the Patriots, and then the Bills again.
Okay. Yeah.
So, yes, we're in second place, a half game behind.
Yeah. I mean, do you know of any Jets fans?
No one predicted this.
Who anticipated anything like this?
For the season or this week?
For this season. This season.
No. I think what did I predict? 8 or 9 wins?
I can't remember if you went 8-9 or 9-8. I think you went 8-9. I think you went a game under 500.
Yeah. And
you said you would have been satisfied with
I would
that as progress.
Oh, yeah. I'm pleased. I'm real pleased right now. This has been great.
Okay.
I think it's been – I mean, the defensive line is amazing. 5 sacks on, the largest human on the planet is good.
That's right. All right. Elsewhere in the NFL, breaking news, Justin Fields actually might be pretty good if you actually design an offense around his talents as opposed to force him to do things that are not in his sweet spot.
Well, Miami won that game.
They did. 35-32.
But did you see the Miami coach's press conference after the game? They had him. They said, "You yelled something at Justin Fields during the game. What was it?" He goes, "Honestly, I just yelled at him to stop running the ball." He didn't listen.
Yeah. So Justin Fields set an NFL single-game rushing record for a quarterback with 178 yards. And also, including one of those was like a 61-yard touchdown run. And he also threw 3 touchdown passes and no picks.
That's great.
That's a terrific day. But again, what it just shows is if you design an offense around your talent, instead of saying, "Well, here's my offense," you have to try to squeeze into it.
That's right.
Like that's what just drives me crazy. So give some credit to this current last year's Bears coaching staff. Like they just They tried to squeeze Justin, and even the beginning of this year,
Tried to make him a pocket
they tried to make him
passer.
just kind of purely a pocket passer, and he's good in the pocket, but that just takes away a massive part of his skill set, and it's hard to defend. I mean, look, if they could just model themselves after what the Ravens do, where you're not expecting Lamar Jackson to necessarily light you up for 350, 400 yards just by standing back in the pocket and picking apart zone defenses or hitting tight window throws. That's just not Lamar Jackson's game. But the fact that he's such a dynamic athlete, you have to respect his running ability, and that changes how you play defense.
Sure.
And that opens up some of those better throwing opportunities.
Now, the drawback of that is those quarterbacks can get hit and injured more easily than, say, a pocket passer like a Josh Allen or something like that.
That's
and
true.
so
But
it's a bit of –
even the Bills are doing design QB runs with Josh Allen.
well, yeah, but their quarterback's 260 pounds.
Justin Fields is like 230.
Is he really?
He's a big dude. He's like 6'4".
That's bigger than I expected.
6'4", 230, I think.
I was expecting him to be 6'1" and like
No.
around 200 pounds.
No, he's thicker than you might think, and he, again, all it takes is one terrible hit and it's all over for anybody, really.
Sure. I mean, we saw that with Josh Allen this week, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he got hit on the elbow, and all of a sudden,
Yeah.
it looks like he might be out for a couple of weeks.
Yeah. So, but yeah. So I'm again, I'm not a Bears fan, but I'm excited for Justin Fields to do well, and so glad to see that. We should wrap up the sports stuff here. The World Series is over. The known cheaters have won again.
Yeah.
Not that we know that this particular team was cheating, but their franchise obviously has a history of this, the Houston Astros.
Well, the last World Series they won, some players on this team were involved in cheating.
Yes. They won that in 6.
I'm happy. Dusty Baker's their manager. I don't think Dusty has ever won a championship.
That was his first, yeah.
And so good for Dusty. I like Dusty. He came in to clean things up after the former coach, who's now with Detroit, I believe, left.
Okay. So that puts a bow on the baseball season. The NBA season is underway. My son Jake wanted me to mention the Cavs are 8-2 to start the year.
Okay.
So they're off to a very good start.
Yeah.
The Donovan Mitchell trade is working out so far for them well.
Yeah. Yep. I like Donovan Mitchell.
Yeah.
A lot.
So, yeah, we'll see where that goes. Again, I think when do you start paying attention to the NBA?
Probably in the new year.
Okay, so January.
Yeah, probably in the new year. Maybe February. But yeah, usually in the new year. Usually Christmas Day is when I'm going to try to watch a game if possible. And
well, there's like 5 of them on, isn't there? Like I think they start at noon and the last one tips at like 10:30 at night.
Yeah.
On the West Coast, yeah.
I keep track of scores right now, but
Yeah.
I don't seek out games or anything like
So
that.
I have no concept how the Knicks are doing.
They're over 500.
Okay.
So they're playing okay.
All right.
Yeah. Just over 500, I believe.
Okay.
If my phone app will
Yeah,
load.
well, that's all right. We should probably move on anyway.
Okay, let's do it.
Let's move on. So today we continue our series on miracles.
Sweet.
We are this is part 3. And today we're doing and again, these are semi-artificial categories, but we're doing Jesus' nature miracles today, and we're including food and drink within that. We had originally talked about having a separate episode on that, but we're just going to include them in terms of the nature, and it makes sense. I mean, when you look at what it
is in a sense nature.
It's transcending the normal operations of nature when you convert water to wine, or when you take 2 loaves of however. Now I'm blanking how many loaves there were. 5 loaves and 2 fish.
Something like that,
and feed 5,000 people.
Yep.
There's clearly something
There's a few that went to a lot.
supernatural going on there. Yeah. All right. So when it comes to the food and drink miracles, the 2 probably the most prominent ones, you've got Jesus turning water to wine, and then the feeding of the 5,000. And then nature miracles, when you've got Jesus walking on water, as well as stilling the storm. Those are a couple of the notable ones as well. So
yeah, water into wine is always an interesting miracle to me. It's only recorded in John's Gospel.
Yep.
It seems to be one of his earliest miracles, and I think it's also compounded by the fact that his mother's there,
Yes.
right? And she's just like, Jesus, do this, you know, like he's done it before or something, you know.
Well, it's interesting because the way that this is John 2, 1 through 12 or 13 there, I think. What's fascinating is they run out of wine at this wedding feast, and Mary approaches Jesus, and she doesn't ask him to do anything. She just says, "They have no wine." It's a statement. It's not a question.
Yeah.
It's a statement. But Jesus clearly understands that it's a statement that's asking you to do something. Just like if your spouse says, "The grass is getting long," what she's saying is, "Go mow the yard."
Mm-hmm.
She's not merely making a factual observation that she expects you to do nothing with. I think it's a similar dynamic here of she's saying they have no wine. And Jesus clearly gets the hint.
With some dramatic eyes. Yeah.
Yes. So what is it that fascinates you in particular about this miracle?
Well, I think it's interesting that it's only recorded in John's gospel.
Yep.
I think that's one of the things that fascinates me about this miracle. And then I'm also fascinated by the reflection of the people that and I wonder if this speaks into a eschatological category or anything like that. Like, oh, you saved the greatest wine for last. Mm-hmm. You know, this is at a wedding.
Yep.
In eschatologically speaking,
yep.
That's talked about in wedding terms.
Yeah.
There's a feast, there's wine, and they've saved the greatest wine for last. Do you see that as sort of like an eschatological reality that the best is yet to come, so to speak?
Yeah, I think I do think that that statement is absolutely sort of loaded with eschatological significance, and I think when you understand the sort of biblical theological background of those of weddings, mm-hmm. and how the Old Testament talks about God's relationship with His people as a wedding or as a marriage. And then when you look at some of these descriptions, like in Isaiah 25, where one of the images of what the new creation is going to be like is this imagery of the hills will drip sweet wine, mm-hmm. and there'll be a feast. And so all of that kind of comes together, I think, to, in this context, help explain why this is his first miracle. And the way that John frames it, when John finishes telling the story, he says, "This is the first of the signs that mm-hmm. he did." And that's a key term in John's gospel of sort of, yes, Jesus does a lot of miracles, but there are these particular ones that are especially significant for helping you understand who Jesus is.
And I'm going to signal them out by going, "This is a sign."
Yes, yes, yeah, for sure. So, and there's even imagery there, in that miracle of, it's noted, there are these 6 water jars there that are used for the customs of the purification and that sort of thing, and they're initially empty. They have to be filled with water, and then Jesus transforms them. I think there's significance there in terms of Jesus being the reality of what the Old Testament law pointed to but could not actually accomplish in terms of true cleansing.
Oh, yeah.
And, later on in Jesus' ministry, he makes it clear that he is the bridegroom of God's people.
And do you think with the wine there's a little future homage to communion, to the Lord's Supper?
I had a student ask me this the other day, a while ago. Actually, not ask me, but assert it.
Oh, really?
Pretty aggressively, actually.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That was the case.
Yeah, that's absolutely there, and that it's really important to understand that passage. That basically it's a picture of the Lord's table.
When people do that, when people assert things very aggressively, my first response is just to disagree with them. I don't know why that is. That's probably not good, but
yes. I'm aware of this feature of your personality. Yes. So I don't see that there.
Okay.
Only by great extension. I'm more inclined to see the wine as a reference to blood and his death and what's necessary in order to accomplish and bring into existence the new creation. Because I think now I see it much more clearly in John 6. I think it's hard to miss
Sure.
those realities when you get to John 6, which we can jump to because that's another food miracle with Jesus feeding the 5,000. And then in the aftermath the next day in his conversation with the Jewish leaders and such, that he goes into the whole bread of life discourse. And he basically in that says, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you will not have life. Now, I don't think the primary reference is the Lord's Supper. I think the primary reference is unless you feast on Jesus, unless you trust in him, unless you delight in him, you won't have life. But then, of course, the Lord's table is a remembrance of that and a visual picture of that. So I think just seeing it directly is, oh, that's straight to the Lord's Supper. Well, I think you got to go through a few other steps before you get there.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about that feeding of the 5,000 miracle. It's one of the miracles that's actually recorded in all four Gospels, and there's just a lot of interesting features of that when you consider. John goes out of his way in verse 4 to make the observation. Now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was at hand.
Yeah. So it's happening during Passover.
Yes. So now you're picking up new Exodus imagery there, and then you get to the end. Yeah, 5 loaves, 2 fish. I got that right. Okay. And then you get to him actually performing the miracle, which it's striking. It's so understated in how it's actually described, right? So verse 11, Jesus then took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. And when they had eaten their fill, he told the disciples, gather up the leftover fragments that nothing may be lost. So there's no explanation of how he does it. It just happens. It just happens. And then he concludes that description there with something really striking in terms of the punchline. Verse 14, when the people saw the sign that he had done, notice that language again, that sign, they said, this is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world. In other words, this is the prophet greater than Moses talked about in Deuteronomy 18. And he's leading us in the promised new Exodus, an even greater Exodus than what was originally experienced by Israel.
And then their response is even more interesting. Like, oh, this is the promise. I would think, where are we going, Jesus? Yeah. Like, let's go. However, they go, or verse 15 continues, perceiving then that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king.
Yeah.
Jesus withdrew.
Yeah.
They were going to make him king.
Yes. Yep. Merging together. So I don't know if they see in that some Davidic overtones or whether they're like, well, I mean, Moses, when you think about it, Moses is never given the title king.
He functioned like it.
But he kind of functioned like one. And so, you've got that. So that's and all the gospel writers record that. What makes John unique is that the next day, John records this conversation that he has in the synagogue in Capernaum as they're sort of debriefing the miracle with the people who had seen it, with some of the Jewish leaders. And Jesus just starts dropping these bombs on them. Him being the bread of life, eating my flesh, drinking my blood, they're talking about, well, I mean, Moses gave us bread in the wilderness, and Jesus is like, slow your roll. That was God. Moses was there, but God gave them manna in the wilderness. And so it's interesting how his response to the perceiving the crowd wants to make him king is not to be like, whoa, hey, you guys are way over interpreting things here.
Yeah.
It's more of just, I don't think you really understand who I am. You're seeing what I'm doing, and you're starting to work in the right categories. He's not denying that he's like, no, I'm not greater than Moses. I'm not bringing a new Exodus. It's just, you guys just don't understand what that looks like and what it's going to require for me to accomplish that new Exodus.
You guys have some categories that are very tied to time and space here.
Yeah.
And my categories blow that up.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. For sure. It's what's striking is by the end of that encounter the next day, as Jesus keeps ratcheting up the intensity of what he's saying, verse 66 here. After this, many of the disciples turned back and no longer walked with him. So this is a day after a lot of these people thinking, we're going to make him king. He's the prophet greater than Moses. And now they're walking away. And Jesus said to the 12, do you want to go away as well? And this is one of my favorite things that Peter says in all the Gospels. He says, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. And what I love about that response is I don't think Peter got it in terms of I don't think he was much more advanced beyond the crowds in terms of having the right understanding of who Jesus is and how it's going to work out and all of that. But I love that his response is, I'm all in with you, Jesus. I may not understand all this, but I am all in. And I think that's a great picture even for us in the Christian life of, Lord, I don't understand what you're doing or why you're doing this or how you're doing this, but I have nowhere else to go, and I trust you that you are indeed the one who can deliver on what you say.
Now, one of the features of John that I find so interesting in John chapter 6 is we keep mentioning, Jesus fed the 5,000 the next day. Mm-hmm. Something happened that night.
Yeah, we just kind of jumped over the fact that in between Jesus walks on water.
Now, in your sense, is that to clarify his deity for the reader? Is that to say, you may be expecting a human to be prophet king, but let me show you a feature of Jesus that's just so outlandish that he doesn't fit those categories. Is that sort of the idea you think that John's getting at?
I think there's certainly an emphasis on his deity in this text, especially when you look at when he approaches. So he's walking out on the water, and the disciples are understandably frightened. That's verse 19. That's verse 19. And then Jesus says to them, "It is I, do not be afraid." Or more woodenly, it's I am. It's an I am statement, essentially. Do not be afraid. And I think that that's a statement of his identification as he's Yahweh.
Yeah.
That the first thing he says to them here is, I am Yahweh, in essence. And don't be afraid because I am with you. So, I think, you could see – I actually had one of our former students ask me in an email, do you think that there are Exodus echoes here in the walking on the water? And my answer was essentially to say, by itself, I think the echoes are relatively faint, but based on the context, it's probably there. When you think about him announcing himself as I am, don't be afraid, and even just kind of seeing what else is in the context, I think there might be some of that as well. So yeah, that's one of those nature miracles where you're like, that's just not possible.
Yeah.
Like you can't walk on water.
So Vern, I always mispronounce his last name.
Poythress.
Poythress.
Yep.
In his book on miracles, which we've linked in the show notes the last couple of weeks, of the walking on water miracles, he goes to Job 9. Job 9:8. This is Job speaking of God, who alone stretched out the heavens and trampled the waves of the sea.
Yeah.
And he has a couple other references in the Old Testament that clearly identify the movement on top of water, whether by horse or by foot, to be connected with God himself. And I think John is looking back at these stories of Jesus walking on the water and connecting it to that for us.
Yeah, for sure. We should probably mention one other nature miracle, Jesus calming the storm.
Yes.
Recorded there in Mark 4 for one of the places it's mentioned. It is just it's striking. You've got Jesus asleep in the boat, tired after a long day of ministry, and the disciples are freaking out because a storm has broken out onto the Sea of Galilee, which can happen very suddenly because of the geography. And several of these disciples are seasoned fishermen who spent, countless days upon days out on the sea. So they're not like people who are inexperienced.
They know when it's bad.
Yeah, and they know it's bad here. So it's funny. They wake him up. I just kind of picture this kind of humorously as, do you want to wake him up? I'm not going to wake him up. Well, somebody's got to wake him up.
Yeah.
And they wake him up, and he simply says he rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still," which I think really is probably a little softer than the language there actually is. It's kind of like, shut up, be quiet, calm down. And instantly the wind stops and there was a great calm. Which, of course, that's picking up Old Testament language of something that only Yahweh can do. That he is the one that controls the seas. So it's a pretty clear – and probably my favorite feature of this miracle besides that is that how Mark concludes the parable or the miracle. And they were filled with great fear. They're even more terrified after the fact. So thinking they're going to perish in this storm on the sea, they're, of course, scared to death practically. And then Jesus stops everything, and they're even more terrified in one sense of like, you're not really supposed to be able to do that. And there's this question of, who is this guy? Like there's this like they're struggling for categories to try to put together who he is and what he's doing.
So I know we're running out of time, but I want to ask you, this story always reminds me of Jonah, the first chapter of Jonah.
Yeah.
What parallels do you make between that? I mean, obviously they're a very similar story, but how does this help us interpret – how does Jonah help us interpret Mark 4, and how does Mark 4 help us interpret Jonah?
So
I realize I said that with like 2 minutes left to talk.
Right.
So
I think the starting point has to be that elsewhere Jesus talks about Jonah being a sign. So Jesus himself identifies the life and ministry of Jonah as in some way pointing forward to him. He specifically focuses on just as Jonah was 3 days and night in the belly of the deep, so too the Son of Man basically will. So there's that starting point that Jesus himself points to Jonah and says, you can learn something about me by looking at Jonah. But this parallels Jonah 1, where Jonah's fleeing from the Lord. The sailors are in this terrible storm, and it's beautifully written because the people who come out looking good are these pagan soldiers.
Yeah.
Or,
sailors.
Soldiers.
Could have been, I suppose.
Yeah, perhaps. And Jonah, this supposed prophet who says, basically, I serve Yahweh. And they're like, a funny way of showing it there. This prophet comes off looking terrible. And you notice that in that passage, he doesn't jump into the sea himself. He says, yeah, throw me into the sea and the sea will stop.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think that there are parallels. Maybe you have Jonah sleeping in the boat while the chaos is going on. But there's a sort of ironic reversal in the sense of you have Jesus, the obedient prophet, who stands up and takes command. But he's more than a prophet because he's able to stop the storm. So, you have to be careful about pressing parallels too far. But it is striking that even though this passage doesn't make this connection, Jesus, in essence, will throw himself into the deep to satisfy the wrath of God and turn it away from others. So those would be a couple connections I'd see there.
Okay. We ready to move on?
We do need to move on. We are running a little bit long, so it is time for This Day in Sports History.
Okay. So November 8th, that's today, 1966, President Lyndon B. Johnson signs an antitrust immunity to the AFL-NFL merger.
Yeah, bringing into that was a key step. They still existed separately, didn't they, at that point? Because they still had the Super Bowl was the AFL against the NFL until they finally merged in like 1970 or something.
Okay.
Because like the first few Super Bowls were the AFL champion against the NFL champion.
Yeah, well, the Packers won the first two.
Yes.
And then from heaven, Joe Namath won the third Super Bowl to save that merger. Anyway, in 1969. 1990, Darryl Strawberry signs a 5-year contract with the Dodgers.
More famous for his time with the Mets.
Yeah, he was pretty washed up.
He was washed up by then.
Yeah.
His substance abuse issues that was.
Oh, absolutely. But he's cleaned up and from all indications is a helpful member of his community. Professes Christ now as well and runs substance abuse places down in Florida. Does counseling.
Yeah, there's a 30 for 30 on
Doc and Daryl.
There you go.
Yeah.
Doc and Daryl. And Doc, by contrast, is still struggling. Is that not right?
Yeah,
as far as we can tell.
He's still famous enough in New York that he shows up, that he's asked to show up at events, and occasionally the papers will catch that he has not shown up to an event that he was supposed to show up to.
Yeah.
And 9 times out of 10, we know what that means.
Yes.
There's been some rumor we're getting Daryl on campus here.
Really?
Yeah, that he maybe in the future, in a couple of years. We have some relational connections to him somehow.
Okay.
I'm not totally sure. But I've asked for one-on-one time, and I can't tell if that's a help or a hindrance to bringing him to campus. Anyway, 1994, the Cleveland Cavaliers' first game at Gund Arena.
Yep.
Am I saying that right? Gund?
Yes.
And they lose to the Houston Rockets 100-98.
Yes. So that's the new facility. I believe they're still in that facility, but it's gone through several name changes
and a couple renovations, I imagine.
Now it's the Rocket Mortgage Arena. It used to be the Quicken Loans Arena. So we're moving through the mortgage companies.
Absolutely.
Apparently.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
A lot of people in Cleveland want mortgages, apparently.
I guess so.
2017, Brazilian surfer Rodrigo Koxa. Did I get that right?
Sure.
Okay. Breaks the world record for surfing the biggest wave at 24.4 meters in Portugal.
Okay.
That's a big wave.
That's a very big wave. So we're talking like 80-foot wave there, I think.
That's huge. Yeah. Dang. That's building size.
Yeah. Yeah.
My goodness. That's a big wave.
So you got a preference out of that list?
I mean, the wave might just be the way to – right? I mean, that's an 80-foot wave. I can't surf at all.
Yeah, yeah.
Can you surf? Have you ever surfed?
No.
Any desire?
No. Have you ever tried to water ski?
Not ski. I've tried to like wakeboard.
Okay.
and kneeboard, but never water ski
Okay.
or snow ski.
I've snow skied once.
Enjoyable?
I did not enjoy it. I was actually like decent at it, but and I mean the views are breathtaking. That's great, right? But it was really hard on my knees. I mean, you think about all the force on your knees as you're going down a mountain.
That makes sense.
Was not great, and I don't need. This is an expensive hobby. Like it's not cheap to go skiing.
Yeah.
I don't need an expensive hobby that I'm probably going to get injured in and don't really enjoy that much. So,
When I'd much prefer to be in the lodge with a book and a cup of cider or something.
Absolutely. So it didn't help that my brother-in-law took me on a black diamond run that I was not ready for. There's a set of classifications.
Oh, yeah.
And black diamond is like the, up at the top. I think there's like a double
black diamond. Yeah.
Did not appreciate that.
I'm reading a book, a novel about this company that's trying to decide whether they're going to sell or not. And they go skiing and somebody's disappeared and all these things. So
okay.
Got very much skiing on the brain right now. In Switzerland. They're in Switzerland actually doing this.
Switzerland. I want to get to Switzerland.
Yeah.
We ready to move on?
Yeah.
One thing you liked?
Yeah.
All right. One thing you liked.
I just want to plug our inauguration as a college last week. I will post the link on the show notes to our YouTube page where you can watch. You can hear from David Dockery, community leaders, Drew himself. It was a great, great time for our college and a very exciting day.
Yes.
Plus the cupcakes were delicious.
I didn't have any cupcakes. I
Big mistake.
Tried to exercise some self-discipline there.
Big mistake.
Yeah, well, you're probably right. I'm gonna go similarly, though. I'm gonna highlight out in particular that David Dockery message.
Was very.
It was like 12 minutes. I mean, there were like 87 people who spoke. Right.
Yeah.
Slight exaggeration, but
and I think we were only like 3 minutes long or something like that. It wasn't very much.
But his charge to our new president in terms of, in essence, he didn't use this exact language, but basically keeping the gospel the central thing, and just his winsomeness and how he communicated it was remarkable. So I will echo that and narrow in even more particular that
very good.
Piece especially, and he's just such a kind, humble man. I mean, he's a really big deal in the Southern Baptist Convention.
Southern Baptist Convention and Christian higher ed in general. I've somehow, this is a story for another time. I was at a president's conference, a Christian college president's conference somehow, and I got pulled into what happens when people start threatening the school and you're getting letters and calls. And this one president's up there giving his story and he just goes, "My first call was David Dockery. I just called him immediately."
Yeah.
And then he told me what to do and who to call.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, so David Dockery, Grace alum.
Yes. And he's the kind of guy that if you bumped into him, like if you happened to sit next to him at a high school sporting event, for example, you would have no clue that he's such a big deal.
Yep.
But he is an incredible man and very, very humble, very kind, very gracious. So I was grateful I got a chance to have two short, probably 5 to 7 minute conversations with him, one before and one after. So that would be my one thing I liked. All right. Well, we've gone longer than we normally do, John. We have talked a lot of football. Those Jets, man, look out.
They're the real deal.
It fits with our emphasis on miracles these last few weeks. So the nature miracles of Jesus.
That feels like a dig, but all right. Yeah.
Serving wine at a wedding. We have talked about a Brazilian surfer, Rodrigo Koxa.
Yeah.
Who surfed a really big wave. And we've talked about the inauguration of our new president. And so I think by definition, we have covered our various and sundry topics. And so all that's left to say is until next time, the Lord bless y'all real good.
Later.